Good morning, everyone. My name is Garina Isasi, and I'd like to welcome you to our first ever virtual workshop for the Gaithersburg Book Festival. We're so happy that you were able to register and join us today. I'm going to just go ahead and introduce you to our first workshop leader. This is Michele Chynoweth. We had a big lesson on that earlier today on how to pronounce her name, and I'm definitely someone who knows it's important to pronounce people's names correctly. So Michele is a best-selling author of books that are suspense novels that reimagine Bible stories. So she is a very sought-after public speaker and has done many workshops in the past and has been at a variety of writers' conferences and other organizations across the country. She's a book editor, she's a book coach, and a college writing instructor. And she's a graduate of the University of Notre Dame and lives with her husband in Northeast Maryland. And welcome, Michele. Thank you so much. And Michele has also been a previous workshop leader for the Gaithersburg Book Festival. And I'm going to just hand it right over and have a great workshop. Go for it, Michele.
Welcome, writers, and thank you, Garina, and to all the Gaithersburg Book Festival staff. I am completely honored to be your first workshop presenter at the Gaithersburg Book Festival. And this is the first of several, so I hope you come back and join the others. We have a full class today of 50 attendees, so I am thrilled and excited about our workshop today, which is on the importance of editing. I'd like to start with something funny just to break the ice, and that's what I usually do in my classrooms. So a writer died and arrived at the pearly gates where she was met by St. Peter, who asked her, "Do you want to go to heaven or do you want to go to hell?" Not being raised religious, she said, "Well, can I see both places first?" St. Peter said, "Sure." So they went down to see hell first. And as they descended, the writer saw row upon row of other writers, chained to their desks, slaving away at their computers in a steamy sweatshop, being whipped by thorny lashes. "Oh my," the writer said, "this isn't the place for me. Let's go see the other place." St. Peter said, "Sure." So they ascended into heaven. And as they did, the writer saw row upon row of other writers, chained to their desks, slaving away at their computers in a steamy sweatshop, being whipped by thorny lashes. "Wait a minute," the writer said. "This place is no better than the other place." "Ah, but it is," St. Peter said. "Up here, they get published." I can't see you laughing. Hopefully you are. So the importance of editing. Why is editing important? Well, it's more important today than ever because there's no second chance to make a first impression out there. Whether you're self-published, and we've all seen some works out there, I'm sure, get published these days because it's easy and free, really, on places like Amazon and Ingram Sparks, where books go out there and they are not ready to be read because they haven't been edited. Traditional publishers are really competitive right now in this world today that we writers find ourselves in. So they're taking less risks on writers. It's all about profits. And so they're very discerning when it comes to submitting manuscripts. So those manuscripts have to be perfect. And that's where editing comes in. I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation. You all should have received handouts. Don't worry if you didn't. We will send them to you at the end. But they're based on the PowerPoint, and you don't need to follow along. They're more of a takeaway at the end of the PowerPoint. So you will receive those, as well as I have other handouts that you'll see little asterisks during my presentation. I will mention that you can get a handout based on various points I'm going to make. Character development, publishing options, even marketing tips. I have taught various classes at Cecil College and in various conferences across the country on various aspects of writing, editing, publishing, marketing. So please feel free to email me after the presentation, and I will be happy to send you more information. So let's get started with our presentation. Okay, here we go. Okay, let me go back to the beginning. Here we go, the importance of editing. Hopefully you can all see that PowerPoint on your screen. Let me just say a little bit more about me and what brings me here today. Like Verena said, I have given a workshop at the Gaithersburg Book Festival before. That was on marketing. I am a native Marylander. I am a news reporter, or was a news reporter rather, after I graduated from the University of Notre Dame. I went a year to Loyola College after I went to NDP in Towson. And then I went into being a news reporter for several local publications, actually. The Aegis newspaper in Bel Air, the Salisbury Daily Times down on the Eastern Shore. I worked at the Baltimore Evening Sun, and finally at the News Journal in Wilmington, Delaware. I then went into advertising. I tried to be more creative with my writing as a copywriter for an ad agency, and then I became an owner of my own ad agency for 20 years. So I got a lot of marketing experience, which helps today in this world, because with most publishing options, you need to do your own marketing and publicity. I was a marketing director for a large corporation in Delaware. But along the way, that writing bug bit me. And I've always wanted to be an author since I was 10 years old. But life happened. I had to pay the bills. I had 3 kids. I got married, divorced, remarried. We have a blended family of 5 kids between us. So a lot of you know it's hard to quit your day job while you're an author or a writer because you have to pay the bills. I was fortunate enough to do that last year and become a full-time author. So it's something to aspire to. I'm the author of contemporary suspense novels based on Bible stories. The Faithful One, based on the book of Job. The PeaceMaker, based on the story of David and Abigail, first book of Samuel. The Runaway Prophet, based on the book of Jonah, set in Las Vegas, a new Nineveh. And The Jealous Son, which just came out last year and republished again earlier this year. And that is actually being featured at the Gaithersburg Book Festival. So you can find more about that on the Gaithersburg Book Festival website. And I'm pleased to be one of the featured authors as well. And that's based on the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis. Along the way, I became a public speaker. I saw that speakers were selling more books at writers' conferences, so I joined Toastmasters and became a speaker at small groups, women's groups, Bible groups, Christian groups, chambers of commerce, wherever I could get a gig, let's just say, to speak about my novels. But I also realized I wanted to share the messages that would help other people out of those Bible stories. And also, writers started to come up to me and ask me, how do you do this? How do you get published? How do you find a literary agent? How do you submit your manuscript? How do you edit your book? And so I became a speaker at writers' conferences and also a college instructor on writing your book, publishing and marketing it. And that led me to become a book coach. I help other writers become published authors through editing, proofreading, publishing assistance, and marketing services. So I do a little bit of everything where needed. And I've helped several authors get their books published out there. These are just a handful. You'll find dozens more. I have them on my website under my book coaching tab, and I'll give you that information later. So let's dive right into editing. The basic tools that you will need are as follows: a synopsis. You need to be able to know what your book's about, to converse about it before it's even finished. You need to be able to say, what is my, people ask you, they may stop you on an elevator. That's why they call it a 30-second elevator pitch. You never know, might be Steven Spielberg looking to base his next movie on your book. What do you do? I'm an author. This is what my book's about. For samples, I can send you samples in a handout later on. but also go to places like Amazon and see how the pros do it. See how they give a blurb about your book and why readers should read it. You also should have a chapter outline. Writers talk about whether they're plotters or pantsers, writing by the seat of their pants. I've always felt that it's a good idea to, whether you write fiction or nonfiction, memoir, not so much for a children's book, which is shorter, but any length of work that's 200, 300 pages, to have that roadmap of where your book is headed. When I edit books, and I'm editing one right now that's a lot like the Game of Thrones, lots of characters, lots of storylines in there. I asked them, this writer did not have a chapter outline and sent me the manuscript. And I said, I need a chapter outline because when I get on chapter 7, I need to know where it's headed instead of rereading the whole book again from chapter 1 on. I can quickly glance at a chapter outline, and it's true for you to act as a roadmap when you're writing the book. Character profiles, if you're writing fiction, setting, timeline. It's good to jot down what your characters are in a paragraph or two in a notebook, let's just say. You can put pictures. I usually cut pictures out of magazines. I usually base my characters on a visual, like a movie star. And I kind of act like a movie director. That helps to be able to go back and visit them again. And I can send you a handout that is 85 character questions to ask your characters to flesh out your characters. A goal for your word or page count. Front matter, back matter, we'll go over that a little bit later. Acknowledgements, dedication about the author. You need a good photo of yourself and a good bio. Whether or not you put them on your book, you'll need those for places like Author Central, your author profile on Amazon, Goodreads, and so forth, along with your synopsis. And reference books. I have a bibliography in your handouts, but there are 3 that I feel are necessities. I teach from these. 2 are basics that go way back, The Elements of Style by Strunk and White and On Writing Well by William Zinsser. They're on any book, fiction, nonfiction, memoir, you name it, whatever you're writing. And then Writing Fiction, which is a really great book that helps with any book, really. And I always say nonfiction should have some story that weaves into it because we need to keep the reader's interest. It can't be dull and dry, but we'll get into that as well. And they're all the books are on your bibliography handout. So first, when you're writing and then when you're editing your work, you need to step back and ask yourself, who is my audience and what is my message? What's your book really about? Why should readers pick it up off the shelves of Barnes & Noble and read it? What's the theme? What's the focus? What's the takeaway? It's what elevates your book into a great book. Same with movies. I always want to not only be entertained, but leave with a message. So you usually write what you know or what you like or what you feel, but you need to connect with the reader too, possibly through your pain or experience. The reader's going to say, what's in it for me? Why should I keep turning the pages? Why should I care? I give 2 examples of books that I'm editing right now. I'm not sure if their writers are on today. One is titled Divorce is Worse Than Death. How's that for a title? And it's a great book comparing divorce to death and really saying it's really, really tough. And he interviews a lot of people with real life stories in there. But I had him tell his story as well because people want to know, why are you writing this book? And he had parents that got divorced. So he actually, tells his story in the front of the book. And I just felt like that was really important. Another book, Don't Forget to Dance, is a memoir about a man whose wife has early onset Alzheimer's. And he set out to write kind of a caregiver's book, a book for caregivers of Alzheimer's patients. And it was kind of dry. If he's on today, he'll be laughing because I pushed him to make it a memoir and to tell the story of his wife. So the book starts out by her wanting to jump out of the car, which was a true story. She tried to jump out of the car in her, with her Alzheimer's dementia, and that grabs the reader's attention. So go back through your book, and it might be that an editor suggests that you start the book on page 100 instead of where you started it on page 1. And you might balk at that, of course. You've spent so much time and energy into those first 100 pages. That actually happened to me with my first editor. They said, you need to cut off, whack off the first 100 pages. And I was stunned, but he was right. So when you go back, you need to make sure that page 1 grabs them from the beginning and they keep turning the pages. But don't force your theme. It may develop as you write the story, and definitely through the editing process. For example, my book, The Faithful One, based on the book of Job, I knew it was a book that reimagined that story of Job, a guy that has everything and loses everything and questions why me, questions God, hangs on to a shred of faith. But the message from the book is really, who are we to question God's ways? And that developed as I wrote the story and then went back and edited it. So plot or contents, you want to go back and, again, make sure you stick to a main story or message. The definition of plot is a fascinating, meaningful sequence of events that pulls the reader along. And it usually starts with a question and answers it. So if you don't have a main question and a main answer to your book, chances are you need to go back and look at that. Pride and Prejudice is a really good example of this. It starts with the question, is Elizabeth Barrett going to marry Mr. Darcy? And it answers that question in the end, but only after a series of conflict. And every good story, every good plot has a series of conflicts that builds to a climax and then a conclusion, which is the answer, yes, she's going to marry him, but only after you pull the reader along with those challenges. And that's for fiction. Fiction and nonfiction need to have a good beginning, middle, and end. Again, a beginning that sucks us right in, a middle that keeps us engaged, either through a series of climaxes or examples in nonfiction of the premise or the message, and then a good end that wraps it all up. I usually like a happy ending. There are a few books out there that don't have a happy ending. Usually maybe a series of books. Mine aren't a series, they're individual. So I usually like to wrap mine up with a at least satisfactory ending. Okay, we'll touch on character real quick, and I have handouts that I can send you if you're writing fiction and need help with that. Why is character important? It makes readers feel. You want to be consistent with your characters and keep track of them. Don't forget who's who. Don't go off on tangents. Characters have different weight to them. You have main characters and then lesser characters. They don't all need names, by the way. They don't all need character descriptions. So it depends on how big a character they are in the book. You want to develop their character gradually throughout the book, and your main character at least needs a character arc. And that's the character as it unfolds to the story. They usually start one way with a viewpoint or values, and they end up morphing throughout the story as those conflicts happen to them, both externally and internally. And that's why the reader keeps reading about them. An example is one of my books, The Runaway Prophet, based on Jonah. My character, Rory Justice, starts out judgmental. He doesn't want to go to Vegas, as he's called to do by his father on his deathbed. A retired FBI agent asks his son, Rory, to go out to Las Vegas and hand deliver a letter to the authorities out there warning them of an underground radical terrorist group. But he wants no parts of it. He has a bad past out there, so he instead mails the letter and jumps on a cruise ship with his dad's money, and bad things happen. I won't tell you the rest, but I have to show his character arc because he ends up back in Vegas working with the authorities. Why? Because he starts to realize he can't stay in his box forever. He needs to work with the sinners out there and experience what they're going through and try to help them. And the message is, God often rescues people who try to rescue others. And we can't always run from God's call. We can try to hide, but that usually doesn't go so well. So God pulls him back in. So you see that character arc in a nutshell. Word on dialogue. How do we write dialogue with quotes? I learned this from my editor early on. It was worth the $3,000 I paid him to learn how to write dialogue. I would say usually, a word on dialogue, I put the help up there. If you're writing dialect or slang, a Southern voice, for example, be careful. It's really hard to do, but if you're doing it, look at the help as a good example of that. And here's how I learned to write dialogue. I would have he said, she said, because I didn't know any better. Quote, he said, quote, she said, which I've seen from writers submitted to me. Or different words for said. She exhorted, he exclaimed, she shouted, he barked. She replied, he whispered. Well, just in saying all of that, the reader gets exhausted by that. And that's not how we really talk out there. So how do you get around that? You use action. You have a quote, you can say he said, or he drank his coffee thoughtfully. You show us what he said or she said and an action. And I do have a handout I can send you. I didn't want to belabor that, but it's a reading from the PeaceMaker that shows that dialogue interspersed with action. Point of view. So we have overall point of view. That's usually who's telling the story. Usually for first person is for a memoir or can be for fiction or nonfiction, which is your viewpoint, or your main characters, or you can tell a story from third person, storyteller or narrator, or multiple third person, several narrators. Be careful with that because the reader can get lost. And I usually tell it from third person, my novels. However, I do go back and forth with the David and Abigail characters in the first part of the PeaceMaker and then bring them together. But that leads me to scene point of view. A common mistake, and I've listed several in one of your handouts, but a common mistake is not staying consistent within a scene of scene point of view. For example, a writer starts out in Mary's point of view, Mary being one main character, and then goes to John's point of view within that paragraph or scene. And suddenly we're seeing from John's point of view and we get confused. So you want to stay at least within a scene in one point of view. So how do you do that? Well, you ask, who is speaking? Whose eyes are seeing events untold? Whose thoughts is the reader hearing? Usually only that of the person telling the story or the main character. One point of view. And a good rule of thumb is to ask yourself, can I see myself in the mirror as the main character or as the narrator or as myself? If I cannot, then I can't say my face turned red with embarrassment. I can only say my face flushed with embarrassment. I can feel that in my point of view, but I cannot see myself usually, unless I'm looking in a mirror. So that's a good rule of thumb. And by the way, I'm going to take some questions in a bit, and I'll take a break to take some questions along the way with our PowerPoint. But then I will have time, 10 minutes or so at the end of this presentation to field questions, so don't worry about that. Maybe now's a good time to field any questions that anybody has. Andrew's going to be fielding those. So what you need to do when you have a question is, I'm trying to look at my, any participants. If you have a question, you just hit the hand in your chat box or participants at the bottom of your screen. Does anybody have any questions? I will move right along, but again, if you have questions, we'll take another break for that. Andrew is my tech guy, and he will take any questions. So feel free to raise that hand now going forward if you have any questions. Okay, Real quick, I'll talk about setting and timing. There's a lot of components to setting. Is place, and you want to be specific. Surroundings, weather, things, time. You know, is this a sci-fi in the future or is it happening right now? Mine are contemporary suspense, but then we have historical, various genres, which we'll talk about as well. And mood can also be painted in your setting. And Edgar Allan Poe was a master of that, right from Baltimore. And then there are components of timing. You can do flashbacks. You can have a prologue or epilogue, which usually jumps back or forward in time. And I would suggest, especially if you're writing fiction, like let's just say sci-fi or a historical fiction, or where you have a lot of characters, to have a timeline so that if your mother and son start out at the age of 30 and 10 in your book, and you go over the period of 50 years, that mother better be 80 in the end, and the son, what did I say, 50 years, son better be 60, right? You better, I probably just messed up those numbers. I'm an English major, right? Not a math major. But you better keep track of that. See how it's easy to get confused? So you keep track on a timeline. So let's talk about style, because this is the nuts and bolts of editing. Show, not tell. Common mistake, all writers, they tell the story or they tell the points of each chapter in a nonfiction book, and they don't show us. So the reader is left with not being able to see or hear or smell or use their five senses. How you show, not tell, is to use description. You only have your words as a writer. And a good detailing of this is in Writing Fiction, page 105. I'm not going to stop and read these because we're limited on time. To also use specificity. So instead of saying the cute blonde, you might want to say she was petite with light blonde hair that fell softly to her shoulders. And she had a smattering of freckles across her nose. You know, you want to be specific. You want your reader to be able to picture in words your characters, your setting, what you're saying. Avoid stiff words like however, therefore, furthermore. Nonfiction writers are prolific at this, where they use a lot of words that are big words nonetheless, and it really slows the reader down. So you want to get to the point. Steer clear of qualifiers. A lot of writers, unsure of themselves out of the gate, use about, somewhat, a little. One of my writers that I've coached says, but I want to be exact, and it was just a little bit or sort of. Well, the reader doesn't, wants you to be specific. So a little bit of that. Appeal to the reader's emotions. And how do you do that? Through their thoughts and feelings. And you show those in italics, just like you show dialogue in quotes. And again, be a prolific reader. Read lots of works similar to your own to learn how the pros do it. Theirs have been edited most likely by professional editors. Other tips on style: use strong verbs, active, not passive. That's really important. Don't overuse is and was. And again, I point these out. You'll be able to go back and check out this PowerPoint. It'll be recorded for various parts in these books that I'm referring you to. Adjectives and adverbs. When in doubt, strike it out. I believe Henry Thoreau said that, and that's a good rule of thumb. For example, you don't want to say yellow daffodils because all daffodils are yellow, or swiftly ran because the guy's running, so we don't need to know that he's swiftly running. So you don't want clutter, and that's really important. Nouns, descriptive and short nouns. You don't want double and triple nouns, which we hear in a lot of political speeches or on on an airplane or by weathermen, precipitation activity. Pronouns, you want to watch. This is another common mistake, mixing singular and plural. When you say, they're running toward me, you don't want to say, so you don't want to use him or her, you want to stick to them. And vice versa. A lot of writers will use they when they mean his or her, or his or hers. Okay. Prepositions, you want to avoid ending on those. Some other rules of thumb, don't be repetitious and redundant. I often see the same words cropping up in sentences, or the same parts of sentences cropping up in a paragraph. The same phrases repeated in the same paragraph. You want to change it up, so that's why you need your thesaurus. Be yourself, don't show off too much. Make sense in your sentences. There's a great example in Elements of Style, a couple great examples where parts of sentences are put in the wrong place. Actually, it's comical sometimes. Occasionally, you can pull off literary or extraordinary style, usually in the revision process. A good example is Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, where he says 7 years ago. How beautiful is that and literary? But, you know, you don't want to be like that throughout, especially if you're not very well versed in that sort of writing. It would have lost something if he said 87 years ago. So it was beautiful, and you can do it and be literary, but just be careful. And again, be yourself. Okay, just a few more things. Tenses, don't go back and forth. That's a common mistake, where it goes from present tense to past tense and back and forth, and then the reader gets lost in where we are, and it sounds unprofessional. Sentences, use a variety of sentence structure and length. Paragraphs, when do I start a new paragraph? You know, sometimes you see these run-on paragraphs with a shift in thought or time or space or scenes or dialogue. And chapters, you start a new one when you have various scenes. And you always want to, this is my opinion, end a chapter with a hook into the next one, fiction or nonfiction. For example, my first chapter in The Jealous Son ends with, it's about Cain and Abel, and loosely based on my two sons who are in their 20s, and they're hiking these two sons through the Grand Canyon. And you're hearing the thoughts of the older brother, the Cain character, and he's thinking, you know, I want to get justice here. I've had it with my younger brother who he's jealous of. And at the end of chapter 1, he goes to do something drastic in the Grand Canyon. I won't tell you what. And that hooks the reader so they keep turning the page. Each chapter should end with a hook to keep that reader turning the pages. Because the worst mistake we can make is to lose the reader. They close the book, never to return. We want them to read the book, and we want them to finish the book. You want to be clear, be consistent, be concise. You don't want clutter. There's no need to say, I need to free up a few minutes, or I need to, there's some good examples in this on Writing Well. He gives a whole page on clutter. And he says writers tend to do this where, I'm just reading from this, we need to head up a committee or free up a few minutes or face up to our demons. There's no need to say face. No need to say up. You face, you free, you head a committee. And there's lots of examples in there. You need to be yourself. So take a deep breath, and when you're writing, relax. Don't look at every single word and rewrite that sentence 10 times, because you'll get stuck and you'll never finish your book. So I always say the editing should come in after you're finished writing. Sure, you want to write well along the way, but only you can put this in, and the editor will take it out. Or you can take it out in the editing process. And you want to be original, avoid cliches at all costs. I can't tell you how many editors with publishing companies will say they're on to these cliches and they've heard it all before. So they love similes and metaphors. And I also have a handout on that if you're not unsure of that. So let's talk about the editing process itself. You want to, before I go on to this, does anyone have any questions? You can raise your hands. I think Andrew's on here and he will field any questions. I don't see any. Andrew, do we have any questions?
We have 2 questions.
Okay, I'll carry on and again take questions. We have 2 questions. Okay, I can't see those, so
Why don't you go ahead and exit out of your.
what do I need to do to see those?
Go ahead and exit out of your screen share.
Stop sharing. Okay. All right. Let's see who has a question here. Okay. I'm looking at participants. Oh, I see. Leslie Stack. I know Leslie. How are you? Let's take a question from Leslie.
Hi, Michelle.
Leslie, you're on.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, I am. Can you hear me? Okay. I wanted to ask you about the handout.
Yes.
When do you, how do we go about getting the handout?
Okay, the handouts, okay, at the end of my presentation, I'm going to leave my email address up. It's Michele@michellechynoweth.com. My website is michellechynoweth.com. It's the spelling of my name, Michelle with 1 L and Chynoweth. I'll just quickly throw that out there, but I'll leave that up at the end and you'll be able to go back in and get this recording and capture that. And I will follow up with all of you with an email that sends you my basic contact information. So you'll be able to respond and say, I would like a handout on character development or publishing options or cliches or whatever the case may be, and I will be able to send that. You all did receive an initial packet of handouts, and if you did not, don't worry, because we're not going through those. They're based on the PowerPoint today. They have a little more information on how to find an editor and so forth, and the different types of editing, even a sample contract from myself, but a sample editing contract to show you what to look for. So if you did not get those, we'll be sure to get those to you. But most of you should have received those. So don't worry though, you'll get everything you need. So thank you, Leslie. And we have a question from Beth Hadley, who I also have met before. Hi, Beth. Welcome. And you had a question? I don't see Beth's screen. So
unfortunately,
Beth,
it looks like Beth's not going to be able to speak. She is a older Zoom client that she'll need to upgrade.
Well, Beth, you know where to find me, so you can follow up afterwards. I'm here. I'm very flexible and approachable, so just know that all of you can reach me at any point in time in the future after the presentation today, and it's really great to see you all. Okay, so we will pick up where we left off. We have still a few more things to cover, and then I'll leave open time for everybody to jump in. Okay, so here we are. Okay, the editing process. This is the meat and potatoes. So again, write from the heart, rewrite from the brain. So in other words, get that pain out on the page, get what you need to out, get your message out, get that story out, and then go back. And with these books that I've mentioned, When Writing Well, The Elements of Style, By Your Side, I also have Writing Fiction, and Google also. You can Google anything, you know, when do I use then versus then, all of it. When do I use a long em dash versus ellipsis? You can Google anything these days. or when in doubt, just shoot me a quick email. But then you want to go back and put your editing hat on. Okay. You do need to get your manuscript these days as close to perfect as you can. There's no more handing in a bad draft. I'm sure Stephen King possibly can hand in a not perfect draft because he's Stephen King. But for the rest of us, we need to make it perfect. Okay, but don't stress like this writer. I'm going to give you some more tips. Walk away for a while. It's always good when you finish that book. Celebrate that, by the way. Take yourself out to dinner and celebrate the fact that you finished writing that manuscript. Then walk away. Take a little break. Go on vacation even. Print it out. I always suggest reading it printed out and read it out loud. It's the best way to edit your book. Read it out loud. You're going to hear those repetitive words. You're going to hear that funky dialogue. You're going to hear when you had sentences that don't make sense. You're going to hear it all because your ear hears when your eye doesn't necessarily see it. Ask a few beta readers. If you're not sure what beta readers meant and you've heard that term before, basically it's your first readers. So you finish your manuscript, and I usually hand it to my husband, but they say I also hand it to several writers and editor types who will read it for me, both for content, like the story itself, and also I tell them to let me know if they catch any errors. None of us are perfect out of the gate usually. And pay attention to when you hear the same thing from several beta readers, because that's probably a nugget that you can hold on to and say, wow, two readers were saying that it had a slow beginning, so I need to look at that. Joining critique groups for feedback is always a good thing. And it's usually suggested that you don't just rely on your husband or wife or mom or dad, but that you hire an editor, and you need to trust them, but hold your ground if necessary. If you feel like you're writing in a certain voice and that editor starts to give you a suggestion, recommendation that takes you outside of that voice, you might want to hold your ground on that. Most of the time, I've found that professional editors are spot on with their advice and recommendations. You want to learn track changes. All editors work in track changes. It's in your review tab in Microsoft Word. It drops down and it red lines the book. And I could give a whole course on track changes, but basically it's like taking a red pen. You go through and make changes. Your editor will get your clean manuscript, give it back to you with those red lines. And they'll also make comments in the sidebar on the side of your manuscript to explain why they made the changes they did. And then you'll go through and accept or reject each change line by line. I can show you after the class. Okay, you want to edit first for main components, plot, organization. Do the chapters fall in line one after the other? I've had to take writers' chapters and take chapter 9 and make it chapter 2. It happens sometimes. Are the characters well developed or not enough? And so forth. And then you take that, what we call content editing, and do the rewrites. By the way, there's a handout, content editing versus this next one, which is called copy editing. So you have this first edited manuscript come back to you for content editing. Then the editor is going to do a copy editing. That's the fine tuning. And they'll probably do that the first time around too, if there's any egregious errors in it. I usually go through and do both. But then it's going to be fine-tuned because you're going to have rewrites. So those rewrites need to be edited. And that's where we point out grammar, punctuation, poor word choices, repetition, clutter, etc. So then you're going to think you have a clean manuscript, but it still needs to be proofread a third time for extra commas in the wrong places, quote marks missing, periods where they shouldn't be, that type of thing. And then you'll have a final draft that you can submit. How many times though? I pointed out at least 3. There may be more than that needed. So as many as it takes. And I would suggest if you're submitting this to a publisher and you have to pay for those for second and third rounds of changes, which is often the case, you want to make those where you don't have to pay for them down the line, because they can add up into the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Just a word to the wise. Okay, research. Google is great, but there is still something to be said for doing research in person. And if you can't in person, over the phone, to talk to real people, to get, if you're developing a character based on a real person, or if you're researching something, I'll give you an example. So you want to authenticate everything in your book, people, places. You can use the library and books. For example, my book, The Jealous Son, is based on the Adam and Eve characters, first people in America, the native Navajo culture. I went out to Arizona and I saw this firsthand in the native Navajo land, as they call it. But when I sat down to write the book, I wanted to make sure I was representing those authentically. The native Navajos are very private people. So I had a lot of difficulty. I had friends say, I have a cousin who's a Navajo, I will check with them. And they did not want to be part of the book because they did not want to even read it, because they're very shy and private people. I did finally call, as my publisher was like, we need to publish this. I was persistent, and after about 1.5 years, I found someone at Dene College, which is a Navajo tribal college in Arizona. So be persistent. Don't give up. Formatting. You have a handout on this. I'm not going to belabor this, but these are all the formatting suggestions. You don't want different fonts. You don't want flowery, scripty fonts or colors. You want your manuscript to be as clean as possible, because trust me, if you're submitting it to a publisher, they will reject it automatically if they see a blue font in a scripty font for your heading. Don't go there. Just keep it in 12-point Times New Roman. You can bold the chapter headings, but that's about it. Okay, and double spaced. So editing overview, you want to make sure you have good organization, point of view that's consistent, your message is clear, your book has a beginning, middle, and end, your characters and dialogue are natural and believable, you have good writing style, you have transitions and chapter hooks, and get at least one person to professionally help you. I do have handouts that go over some of this, but how do you find an editor? Well, go online, ask for references. Your editor can be a book coach, content editor. They should be your chief critic and your cheerleader. I'm a big cheerleader, so that goes with my territory. So I usually am very encouraging. However, I will be straightforward as well, and I will answer all your questions, but I'll also be critical, because that's what you need. You don't need your best friend telling you your work is great. Their background can include, there can be a freelancer, journalist, author, teacher. Who your editor is not is your literary agent, your publisher, or your publicist, although some can assist, and I usually do, with finding those. Check editors' websites. Check mine. Look at their experience, the books they've edited and published, endorsements from other writers. And finally, go to more workshops and conferences. You're going to find editors at those. So real quick, we have various options today. We can still, and I can send you a handout on this, there's the big 5 now, 5 traditional big publishers, and they usually encompass all the imprints out there. So for example, HarperCollins, and that has a variety of imprints underneath it. Penguin Putnam and Crown Doubleday, and they have various imprints. Then there are the indie presses. There are hundreds of those. They all have different submission processes. Usually for this first one, you need a literary agent, whatever you write, to represent you. And that's a whole other process. And I can send you information on that, sample query letter, and so forth. Indie presses, like some of those you can approach yourselves. Some need to have it submitted through a literary agent. Some don't take new submissions. Hybrid or assisted self-publishing, there's usually a fee. Maybe it goes towards your book, printouts, print on demand, also known as vanity or subsidized. And then there's your do-it-yourself through Amazon, KDP. Used to be CreateSpace, now it's KDP. And if you don't know what you're doing, get help on that, because it's not as easy as it sounds for most. So in conclusion, your manuscript should be perfect. It should have a great and unique as possible title. You can test them on Amazon. For example, The Runaway Prophet, I wanted to call that City of Sin until I realized there was a porn movie out there called that popped up on Amazon. And I was like, okay, I write modern day contemporary novels based on Bible stories, so that wouldn't be a good thing. So I called it The Runaway Prophet. That's an extreme example. But you also don't want a title that 10 other books have, because people won't find yours. It'll get lost. Have a word count and genre, subgenre. This is very important. What is genre? It's a category of your book. I'm going to go through that in a minute. Be properly edited, proofed, and formatted, obviously. Okay, you'll need all these things. This is why genre is important. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but down here on the left, you see categories of fiction. This is for one of my books. You can be 3 million, which is this number, unfortunately, in the millions, 10 million or 20 million books out there or more. But that gets narrowed down, and you can actually get into the top 100 if you pick the right subgenres for your book. A publisher will help with this, but if you're self-publishing, make sure you consult with somebody and do this right. So when my book, The Jealous Son, featured at the festival, was first launched, it was #1 in biblical fiction because that was the right category for it. So it climbed the charts, and Amazon promotes it at that point. You also need a good synopsis, bio, and photo for your author profile, which I show here. And as I mentioned, I'm a featured author, so you can find more about my book and I on the Gaithersburg Book Festival site. They have a video that I did for that because we're in our Zoom setting. And also my book is available on Politics and Prose because it is featured as one of the books at the festival, along with many others. Great books, great authors. Check it out. And thank you very much. I'm going to stop the share now. But here's my website and my email address. If you want additional handouts on anything, just put that in the subject line and email me, and I'll be sure to get those to you. So we have a little time left, and we can go a little over for by a few minutes, I was told. So who has questions? I see Leslie Kamenshine. Leslie, you're on. If Andrew can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. You're still muted, but we need to just, okay, there you go. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Michelle. I very much enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. I have several questions. One is there a difference in getting an editor who does fiction versus nonfiction?
Yeah.
Do editors specialize, in other words, in fiction or nonfiction?
That's a good question. Some do, and in some cases they specify even a subgenre, as I was talking about, where they only do Christian fiction or historical fiction. Most editors out there do a variety, do fiction and nonfiction. I'm one of those that I will do both. And sometimes that's a good thing. Don't go by what they write. Don't go by the fact that I write contemporary inspirational fiction, because I can plug in those abilities as a fiction writer to help a nonfiction writer bring in that story, bring in that description, make your nonfiction book come alive. Because sometimes they can get a little dry, so you want to bring out some story in there, and vice versa. So with fiction, you might want to check with an editor who has nonfiction books out there. They can help you organize your story a little better so that it has that beginning, middle, end. So you don't want to go by what they write, but you do when you query them or submit what I'll usually ask for is a few sample pages from your manuscript. That gives me an idea of if I can help you, because sometimes I have had it happen where I've had pages submitted which aren't even ready for content editing. They're just not ready, and they need to go back and rewrite the whole thing. That has been rare. It's only happened on 2 occasions with me. Most of the time, they'll submit a few pages, and I'll give them just some pointers and say, go back and rewrite it and then resubmit it, or it's ready to be content edited. And I'll take a look at the genre at that point. And I've done children's books recently. I've opened it up. I'm working on a Game of Thrones like book, like I mentioned. And so I take a variety. For me, it keeps it fresh.
Thank you for that. I understand from your last comment at the very end that you also do children's books. But as a follow-up to that, what does an editor of children's books do that, say, a fiction editor does not do or does do? I mean, well, what's the difference?
So for a children's book, in particular, I just got done editing one that rhymes, and that rhyme wasn't really flowing at points in the story. And so I counted the syllables, I changed it up. And a lot of it is like fiction, where you put a little bit more description in, or specific words that have a better sound to them for a children's book. And the difference is, a children's book, to edit a manuscript and illustrations aside, I don't do illustrations, you need an illustrator. That's a much shorter work, so it's going to be a lot less expensive. So I usually charge by the word count, the page number. A children's book is much shorter, and so it's going to cost a lot less. And when you submit your book, several editors will ask for those sample pages, because they want to see what shape they're in, how much work they're going to do, because basically we pay for our time. So we base our charges on how much time it'll take, both page count, and we want to get it into shape. So it's easy to edit.
So as a follow-up to the cost, how do I begin to think about the cost even before I submit a manuscript to an editor? What is the general cost? How do you figure cost?
Okay, well, mine is usually pretty straightforward. So I'll say $7 or $8 a page for the content editing, and then roughly $3 a page for the copy editing, proofreading. So add that up, it's $10 or $11 a page times however many pages, if your book's ready to be edited in those regards: content editing, copy editing, and the proofreading I usually make part of that. But it's individual, so you would submit pages, some sample pages, maybe a sample chapter, and we can't read the whole book. And give us a synopsis or a chapter outline or both. That helps. And we'll see if it's a good fit. And then we'll give you a proposal. I'm sorry, that's a good question. I will give a proposal, individual proposal, that gives you a final price that will not go over. unless you add 100 pages, and then, you know, that's in your contract. So based on that proposal, if you accept it, and I usually give a package deal where if you do content editing, proofreading, all of the steps, I'll usually try to give a discount, and I'll give discounts from time to time. Then you can pay sometimes monthly, that type of thing. We'll work that out. I'll send back an agreement that we both sign that protects both of us, and we'll talk about a timeline, you know, and getting it done within a time frame that works for both of us. You always want to get an agreement or a contract with a bottom line, so that you're not shelling out money down the line. You know, nobody wants to be nickel and dimed. So it should be really straightforward from an editor.
Is that a discussion point with your editor? In other words, you know, why are you charging this, or why not are you charging this? What's included? When you, the content editing includes the kinds of things you've listed, is that right?
Yes, the proposal will have everything listed out with fees attached, and then we'll go back and forth. Say you only want one of the services, that's all you can afford right now. Okay, I will let you know that will work or not, but if it works, then I'll send you a contract with everything spelled out. Understood.
Thank you for that. And my last question is, do editors get involved in helping an author or writer get involved with social media?
That comes in the marketing end of things, and I have a whole course, several courses actually, on marketing, and I help with that because I've been there. I've actually, I meant to say, my books have gone from self-publishing to I now have a literary agent, and I'm with a traditional publisher, and I've gone in between with the indie publishers. I've done a lot of marketing and publicity because I have 30 years worth of experience in that realm. So I can help with that, but that's separate. That's like a separate entity. I am always, though, like I said, a cheerleader, a fan of my clients. So I will help them as much as possible, but we do have to get paid for our time. So that'll be a separate proposal. But I'm always willing to promote my clients out there. I do that on my website. I do it on my social media. I have tons of followers, so I will, from time to time, mention my clients' books out there, because if you're successful, I'm successful. That's the bottom line.
But in addition to initially helping the author, would you be in a position to recommend somebody who would specifically be knowledgeable about how to get involved with specific social media?
Oh, absolutely. I work with a variety of people, one in particular on social media, but she's not the only game in town. So I'll give you a few references. Yes, I will absolutely help you with that.
Understood. Thank you so much for answering all my questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Leslie. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Does anyone else have a question? You just raise your hand in the chat or participant box. I don't see any, but like I said, feel free to email me and I will get back to you. Please visit me on my website. Please come back to the festival and attend the other workshops and author videos on there. They're entertaining. And please connect with me on social media. On my website, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, the whole 9 yards. So make sure you connect with me. And thank you very much, all of you, for attending. You've been a lovely audience. And I look forward to hearing from all of you in the future. And good luck with your books. Get them out there. The world needs your books. So thank you again.